to a special Light Reading Innovator video with Juniper Networks. I'm Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading. And joining me today is Andrew Vaz from Juniper. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hey, good, Phil. Thanks a ton.
Thanks for doing this. So I have plenty of questions about edge computing and the edge in general. Juniper is heavily invested in the edge. And I guess a great place for us to start is what is the state of the union, if you like, on the multi-service edge business for Juniper?
Yeah, thanks, Phil, for the question. And it's actually fascinating right now. And I'll take a step back and actually talk through what we're seeing in the market, first of all. When I talk to various service providers, really globally, as well as certain enterprises, what we see is a doubling down, candidly, on what I would call critical network infrastructure. And the multi-service edge is absolutely a piece of that critical infrastructure. When we look at it, you can see where we are in these times of the pandemic. Functionally, you've seen network paradigms change in terms of how people use the network, what kind of applications they're using on it. We've seen amazing statistics from various providers, cloud providers, et cetera. I think Microsoft was quoting almost an 800% increase in cloud usage. AT&T was talking about 700% increase in SD-WAN connections across the board. And you see it in your own home, working habits. Now, as the kids go back to school, et cetera, we're seeing just increased online learning, collaboration tools, et cetera, and it keeps ramping. One of the critical things we're seeing is people don't know if we'll ever go back to how it was. So you functionally see a difference in how the network's being used, the criticality of the network, and the functions in the network that are required. As things are changing, people are being required to be more flexible and versatile in frankly, how their network works overall. And that's where multi-service edge really comes into play. It's a catch-all term in some sense because it's providing so many different services. It could be business services. It could be residential services, which is obviously very important right now. It could be cloud edge services as well. So across the board, you're really seeing a doubling down in terms of how people invest in these multi-service edge networks. You're also seeing an increase in the number of what I'd call vectors of what they're taking into account as they invest in it. And what I mean by that is it's not just about bandwidth or power per gig anymore, because the traffic patterns are changing, the applications being used are changing, how they're being used are changing. People are looking at flexibility, versatility, security, resiliency across the board. So if I said, what's the state of the multi-service edge business? Again, people are doubling down on it, but they're also looking at it much more broadly in terms of how they evaluate their vendors.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the Juniper's, I guess, competitive advantages in the past had been investing in silicon for the edge. Is it still doing that?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say we're extremely proud of our custom silicon edge investments, especially. If I take a look at the Trio chips, which really power our MX universal router portfolio, which is really where we go after the multi-service edge with. That's 15 years of investment. I would say, as I said, the number of vectors of evaluation have broadened. And the capabilities, having such flexible built silicon, is really critical for us at this stage. And let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. When Juniper architected this Trio silicon for its MX routers, it's actually fascinating. We're bringing features out today on really some of our first generation of chips. That's how flexible they were architected and they were built. It was built with a philosophy of any type of feature, any type of new application should be able to be coded onto these chips. And that's just not something that's looked at today. Chips tend to be a little bit more specialized in terms of their purpose and form, fit, and function. So one person told me it was an interesting one. They consider this Trio chip as the Intel processor of the networking chipset, and we're finding that true. So with a heavy investment, 15 years of investment, we're actually on our fifth generation of chip. We're working on our sixth and planning our seventh. So we have a continued investment here.
Yeah, it's a constant cycle. So earlier you said the multi-service edge needs flexibility and it needs features that scale to meet the growing number of applications. At Light Reading, we've covered a bunch of new competitors that have shown up and new entrants in this in the edge computing space, but also the edge networking space more specifically.
Right.
How do these newer endeavors compare to Juniper's MX?
You know, Phil, I would say this. I'm a big believer in the right tool for the job, right? And in some parts of your network, you're going to be focused on pure cost per bit, pure power per bit from CapEx, OpEx perspective, and how much data you can move. In some cases, you're going to be focused on how you also process those bits. What kind of functions can you actually perform on those packets, the networking protocols, and again, do you have that versatility and flexibility to handle new use cases? So again, this is where I would say if I stacked up the multiple vectors where Juniper performs very well, we have some of the highest logical scale capabilities due to our software and our chips. So for example, we have 10 million fib route capability. We have amazing fast filter capabilities that we've built into our chips. That allows us to perform like 1 billion um, filter operations on our systems. And why is this important? Because as you start looking at new applications like security, and you have to program your router to work in real time without a performance hit, yet perhaps filter an increasing number of attack vectors, of malicious performers, et cetera, it becomes critical for us to be able to handle those new types of applications as we go forward. So I would say this: right tool for the job. If
Mm-hmm.
the focus and which is what we're seeing for multi-service edge is on breadth of functionality, feature flexibility, able to be handling this new set of applications and use cases that things like you can't predict, like the pandemic, are forcing in on us.
Right.
It becomes really critical. A great example of this is if you look at the enterprise workspace now. All of
Mm-hmm.
us are working from home for the most part in the high tech industry and beyond. Most of our children are going back to school and online learning. The
Yeah.
actual paradigm of security has changed. It's no longer a central security. And when we talk about things like SASE, for example, we say the enterprise network is inverted, right? So now people are accessing enterprise assets from outside the network. Now, the number of endpoints has dramatically increased, right? The number of threat surfaces has also increased on par with that. So people are rethinking how the heck do I manage this and enable this as I go forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. It has really changed the shape, I guess, of the if you look at all the people connected, the shape of the network diagram suddenly looks a lot different with people working more from remote areas. Um, Part of the multi-service edge story has to be software, obviously. So Juniper's flagship software is Junos. How is that addressing the needs of both the multi-service edge and cloud computing?
Yes.
Uh, as part of this story.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you're right. The investment is obviously not just the hardware and the chips; it's actually the software and what it does. I would say we've invested in three vectors overall, three main vectors overall. I'll give you some examples here. One is in the Junos architecture. We've spent a considerable amount of time rewriting some of the guts of Junos, so it's much more scalable, programmable, more easily able to allow us to code and improve our feature velocity. So the guts of Junos itself has been dramatically upgraded, if you will. The second and third pieces really have to do with specific use cases. And let me take residential services as one of those use cases. I feel we have one of the best residential subscriber or B&G systems, frankly, on the market, and we're actually improving that. The next set of innovations include CUPS, which is basically control plane and user plane separation. for the B&G market, where we have that coming out. And it also allows us to go and scale a control plane in a cloud scale manner on demand while leveraging all of these fast filters, massive bandwidth capabilities on the actual router itself. So we split the control and data plane and are enabling us to take the best of both worlds, if you will. The second thing we've done with that is we've actually looked at wireless convergence and fixed wireless access and how we kind of merge these pieces together. We're working with several customers, one in APAC, where they're actually using the MX as this BNG. And the next step is actually integrating this fixed wireless access, this combination of mobile subscribers and wireline subscribers in the same box. So you can see the software is just expanding dramatically in terms of its capabilities and feature set. And it's really allowing our customers now to leverage the best of all worlds with this. The final example I'll give you is with security. And I think this is a super important one given where we're at. We already saw this with like 5G applications, right? With the number of endpoints exploding from IoT, MMTC, and different applications. Now we're throwing a pandemic on top of it with everybody working from home. Your threat surface is increasing dramatically. We actually have an incredible amount of integrated security in the MX router, both from a hardware and software perspective. We actually have some, what we believe in is a connected security. Basically, your security has to connect into the network holistically, not just as a point piece. So if you look at what the MX can do is we have an example of this is our partnership with Carrero, where we work with Carrero's threat defense director. We're able to actually implement massive scale DDoS protection type capabilities in the sub 15 seconds, where the threat defense can actually take and analyze mirrored packets and actually go program the MX routers with our fast filter capabilities to go and scrub and protect your edge for massive DDoS attacks. We have another feature called Sky ATP, where we call it Sec Intel, where basically the security intel capabilities are we connect to Juniper's cloud ATP system, where we constantly monitor and look at malicious performers, malicious IP address, hosts, etc. And again, we can keep a whitelist, blacklist, etc., and program the actual routers, these custom ASICs that we have, to basically filter out any of these bad performers on the network or malicious actors on the network as well. So you can see our software is not just on box, we're also scaling it off box to integrate properly with various cloud systems.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that explanation, because that kind of walked me through the whole range of activities that are going on around that. Let's talk a little bit about and kind of summarize, because you brought it up a couple of different times, necessarily. Let's sort of summarize how Juniper's MX is addressing the challenges that have been brought on by the pandemic. Because as you mentioned, and as we observe day to day, it's obviously changed the way we work. It's changed the way that people are using networks. How is the MX sort of holding up and addressing those changes?
Right, and that's a really good question. If I could summarize it in a way, is with things like the pandemic, where there's so many states of unknown, more so than our traditional life pre-pandemic. We're seeing operators have to respond in different ways for their network, and they're looking for something they can trust, number one, and something that's flexible. One comment from a customer was, "It just works. No matter what angle or curveball I've been thrown, the system's flexible enough that you're able to handle it." So when I say think of multi-service edge, and it's probably the most demanding set of use cases in terms of a network device that would have to handle, you have to look at it across the board. And when you measure it across all these different vectors, performance, logical scale, security, resiliency, software capabilities, and breadth, the MX is the gold standard, candidly. It's the hardware was designed this way. The ASICs were designed from the ground up from day one to handle this. And our software also handles this. And you can, like we talked about, these various use cases, you can see we're integrating many different ancillary areas to make a network operator's life easier. We've anticipated the security threat impact. It's frankly just been accelerated. That's one thing I would say with the pandemic is really some of the trends we are seeing. It's actually just accelerating overall. So it's becoming very relevant for various vendors today.
Okay. Last question. How has the pandemic changed the technology consumption model for your customers, the service providers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because that has functionally changed overall. Um, and again, I'll say there's an acceleration that has taken place here. We were already seeing a propensity for service providers wanting to consume what I would consider as on demand. So as they had a take rate on a service, they'd want to pay for it, like pay for a port or pay for a use case, et cetera. This is something we've actually focused in a lot on. I always tell my team, you can innovate on the hardware, you can innovate on the software. Actually, the consumption models are equally as important to innovate on, easier for customers to actually absorb and consume the product. So we're seeing this now. Basically, as there's hotspots, as there's COVID hotspots, for example, or as even people are looking at specific use cases, we've actually changed our consumption models to look at it from an application basis. For example, if somebody's just using it for basic transport, cost per port's probably less than if somebody's using it for a high-end service like a BNG or a fixed wireless access service. It's doing less work. It's not a revenue generating type of port. People can buy it differently. People are also looking at buying in chunks. So maybe they want to buy a 24 port 100 gig line card, but they only need 12 ports. The ability to offer them a pay as you grow type capability, offer it on demand, if you will, to turn on ports as needed, has become critical. So we're absolutely seeing innovation around consumption models as much as we are on the basic technology pieces.
All right. I think it's a great place to leave it for now. It sounds like things are as busy as ever at Juniper and active as ever in the multi-service edge. Andrew Vaz, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot, Phil. I really appreciate your time. Take care.